Where did he come from? What were his crimes as a Death Eater, and how did he manage to become the headmaster of a renowned school of magic, despite having a criminal past? Today, we are going to learn a little more about the story of Igor Karkaroff. Probably born somewhere in Eastern Europe, nothing is known about his childhood and youth. His name Igor is Slavic, but it comes from the Scandinavian Ingvar, which means protected by Ing, the Norse goddess of fertility. As for his surname, Karkaroff, it may come from the combination of Karkar, a very common name among the Kipchaks, a nomadic Turkic tribe that dominated a vast territory in the Eurasian steppe from the 11th to the 13th century. And the possessive suffix "off" means of, in this case, son of, so his surname could mean son of Karkar. But since the names of his parents are not known, this cannot be confirmed. It's just speculation, due to the etymology of his name and how it refers to that location in Eastern European countries. We don't know where Karkaroff studied, but it's likely that he was a student at Durmstrang. That's why he probably comes from a wizarding lineage, theoretically pureblood. After all, Durmstrang doesn't accept Muggle-born students. Salazar Slytherin's dream. Karkaroff was a skilled wizard who, at some point in the 70s, saw his ideals reflected in the rise of Lord Voldemort, who despised Muggles and wizards who came from Muggle families. He was recruited, becoming one of the Death Eaters, with his left arm marked with the symbol of loyalty to the Dark Wizard, the skull of a skeleton and a snake coming out of its mouth. During his time serving as a Death Eater, Karkaroff actively participated in numerous tortures of Muggles, and also of Lord Voldemort's opponents. And he did this accompanied by some other Death Eaters, like Antonin Dolorov, throughout the entire period of the First Wizarding War, which began in the 70s, but started to be structured in the 60s. Igor Karkaroff followed Lord Voldemort's orders and carried out various tasks for him. With Voldemort's downfall on October 31, 1981, the Ministry of Magic redoubled its efforts to, at that moment, arrest Voldemort's remaining followers, the Death Eaters who had not yet been identified. After all, no one knew who the Death Eaters were, except for Voldemort himself, who knew all of them. And some Death Eaters who knew each other, but they didn't know who all the others were. That was Voldemort's own security measure. It was during this period that Igor Karkaroff was captured by Alastor Moody, the most renowned Auror in the history of the Ministry of Magic, who captured a large number of dark wizards. Alastor Moody hunted Igor Karkaroff for 6 months, until he managed to capture him. When cornered, Karkaroff decided not to resist arrest, unlike some of his colleagues, who ended up being killed. Once locked up in Azkaban and now faced with a scenario where Lord Voldemort had been defeated, Igor Karkaroff quickly reconsidered his actions, his crimes, and his ideology. So, he sought a chance to escape justice in a significant way, and somehow managed to get a hearing with the Council of Magical Law, which was subordinate to the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, responsible for the trials of those captured during the time of the First Wizarding War. Bartemius Crouch Sr., head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, presided over this council. At the time, Bartemius Crouch Sr. had allowed the Aurors to use unforgivable curses against the Death Eaters and decided to fight fire with fire. He was very determined to arrest as many of Voldemort's followers as possible, and he hated dark magic. He hated that ideology of dark wizards, and he wanted to put an end to the Death Eaters. He wanted to identify all of them. So he agrees to listen to Karkaroff, who had names to offer him. And since the identity of the other Death Eaters was a big mystery, Barto Crouch Sr. agreed. Carried by 2 Dementors, Igor Karkaroff was taken to the center of the Wizengamot courtroom, where he was heard. Once seated in the chair and completely shaken by the presence of the Dementors, chains and shackles closed around his wrists, making any attempt to escape impossible. Not that it was necessary after all. In the presence of the Dementors and without a wand to defend himself, he was completely affected by it.
and his fate depended on what would happen in that hearing.
Karkaroff began his speech by saying that he was extremely remorseful and that he was very ashamed of having been part of Voldemort's followers.
And that he also had important names, not just names, but names of important figures in the wizarding community who were part of this nefarious circle of Death Eaters.
The first name that Karkaroff gives is Antonin Dolorov, his torture partner. Karkaroff was seeking forgiveness and freedom above all else, and it didn't matter whose names he would give. He wanted to get his ticket to freedom and turned in the guy who committed the crimes, who carried out the tortures alongside him.
Obviously, he took himself out of it and said that Antonin Dolorov committed tortures, that he witnessed countless tortures against Muggle-born wizards, against Muggles, and against Voldemort's opponents.
However, Antonin Dolorov had already been arrested. Karkaroff, surprised by the news, pretends to be and claims he is satisfied. But obviously he wasn't, because he lost a card up his sleeve. He lost there a name that he believed could get him out of prison. The second name revealed by Karkaroff was Evan Hosier, another Death Eater, who had also already been captured and, in fact, killed by Alastor Moody, because he resisted arrest.
In fact, he was the one who tore off a piece of Alastor Moody's nose during the battle.
With a certain panic in his voice, Karkaroff realizes that his chances were running out, so he starts looking for some other names. He mentions the name Travers, pointing out that he took part in the murder of the McKinnon family. He reports Mulciber as a specialist in the Imperius Curse, and says he saw Mulciber bewitch several people, dominate them, and force them to do terrible things under the curse.
And he reports Augustus Rookwood, an unspeakable, an employee of the Department of Mysteries at the Ministry of Magic, who was a spy and passed information from inside the ministry through a network of people favoring Voldemort.
And it was only upon hearing that name that Karkaroff seemed to gain the attention of those present at the hearing.
And he realizes that he had reached a very important point, a crucial point, and that this would be worth gold to him.
The other Death Eaters he mentioned, like Travers and Mulciber, had already been arrested as well. Bartholomew Crouch Sr. wanted to open an inquiry into Augustus Rookwood.
And that, meanwhile, Igor Karkaroff would return to Azkaban to await the Council's decision regarding his freedom.
Desperate to avoid Azkaban, Karkaroff tries naming others like Severus Snape, but the Council interrupts, saying Snape has already been heard and acquitted. And Dumbledore himself stands up for him, saying that he had been a witness and that he really had been a Death Eater. Before Voldemort's fall, he switched sides and became a spy, risking his life. But Karkaroff claimed that this was a lie and that Snape was still loyal to the Dark Lord.
Since the Council was quite satisfied with the name Augustus Rookwood, Karkaroff gained his freedom.
Karkaroff's testimony resulted in the imprisonment of Augustus Rookwood and several others connected to He Who Must Not Be Named's network in the Ministry of Magic. This caused Voldemort's forces, even after his downfall, to suffer a major setback, a significant disadvantage, because several names were captured and imprisoned.
After leaving Azkaban prison, Karkaroff did not return to his criminal activities.
He actually reintegrated into society and, at some point, was appointed headmaster of the Durmstrang Institute of Magic, the prestigious school located in the far north of Europe.
During his time as headmaster of the school, Professor Karkaroff was seen by both students and parents as unscrupulous and egocentric, leading many parents to withdraw their children from the school when he took over. This was because Karkaroff encouraged an environment dominated by fear and intimidation. And Durmstrang didn't exactly have a great reputation to begin with, right?
Because it was a school that was based on tolerance of the dark arts and prejudice against Muggle-born wizards.
They didn't admit Muggle-born wizards. So even with that, Karkaroff's administration didn't please some parents. In the year 1994, after a few years of Karkaroff's administration at the Institute, the Durmstrang delegation stayed at Hogwarts for the Triwizard tournament.
Upon arrival, Karkaroff was greeted cordially by Dumbledore, and Karkaroff showed a lot of respect for the institutions and the rules.
This, for those who knew his story, who knew his past, made it clear that he had really left that past behind.
Even with his way of being, he didn't become like a very pleasant guy. That cool company, you know?
A really nice guy, but at least he didn't go back to being a criminal.
Karkaroff, the headmaster of Durmstrang, also acted as a protector and flatterer of Viktor Krum, the Quidditch star and student, who attended with the delegation as a favorite for the Triwizard tournament. And it was remarkable how completely biased he was toward Krum. He treated Krum like a prince, like a king, and treated the other students harshly, without any mercy. He was really rude and harsh with the others. After Harry Potter's name was spat out of the Goblet of Fire, it seemed like Karkaroff's politeness and cordiality were set aside, and he started to have a more aggressive attitude, saying it was unfair for Hogwarts to have 2 champions. And it really was, right? He was right. It was unfair for Hogwarts to have 2 champions,
because the other schools were at a disadvantage. That's a fact. But the way Karkaroff ended up dealing with it, being offensive, cynical, and suggesting that Dumbledore was doing it on purpose, wasn't well received.
Igor Karkaroff showed how to deal with it when he, as a judge, gave scores to the other champions. For Krum, the scores were always high, even when he failed at some points in the tasks. But for Harry and Cedric, the scores were really low.
He gave Harry a score of 4 in the first task, even though Harry didn't break any of the dragon eggs like Krum did, and even though Harry was faster at getting the golden egg.
In the second task, the judges gave Harry the highest score because he arrived first and stayed to ensure he saved both victims, not just his own.
Karkaroff disagreed and didn't give him the highest score, which made him come in second place.
The exchanges of hostility between Karkaroff and Alastor Moody were more intense during that period when he was at Hogwarts, because Alastor Moody had captured him. He was the one responsible for capturing him. And Karkaroff really didn't like him at all. But in that case, since it was the fake Alastor Moody, he hated Karkaroff even more.
Barty Crouch Jr. hated Karkaroff even more, because he hated the Death Eaters who were traitors that abandoned Voldemort, who abandoned the cause, especially those who snitched on the others.
So it was a very genuine hatred that Barty Crouch Jr. felt for Karkaroff.
And that was obvious, even when he was disguised as Alastor Moody, and nobody notices. Because technically, Alastor Moody also hated dark wizards and was the one responsible for capturing Karkaroff.
During the Triwizard tournament, Karkaroff took part, obviously, being very active and helping Krum, which was against the rules.
But up to that point, cheating in the Triwizard tournament is kind of a tradition.
After the first task and before the second task takes place, after the champions go to the Quidditch field to see the maze that was being prepared, Krum ends up being attacked after Harry leaves him watching Barty Crouch Sr., who had shown up at Hogwarts and was saying very strange things. When Dumbledore returns there with Harry, they see that Krum is unconscious.
Karkaroff is called, and he immediately accuses Hogwarts of having attacked Krum and says that Hogwarts was trying in every way to sabotage Durmstrang and the tournament.
And he spat on the ground at Dumbledore's feet, offending Dumbledore, which almost cost Karkaroff dearly, because Hagrid was present and grabbed him by the neck with that little hand of his, lifting him into the air, making Dumbledore intervene and ask him to let Karkaroff go.
Karkaroff was very irritated and nervous, believing Krum had been attacked by someone from Hogwarts. That year, Igor Karkaroff had concerns beyond the Triwizard tournament, because over the months he felt the dark mark on his arm burning more and more and becoming increasingly clear.
And he went to Severus Snape to report this more than once, and when he spoke to the potions professor, he told him to run when the time came, since that's what it seemed was going to happen.
Even with Voldemort's return, when the dark mark became completely clear on Karkaroff's arm and it burned when Voldemort summoned his Death Eaters, he ended up deserting, abandoning Hogwarts, leaving his students behind, and simply vanished, disappeared.
He didn't even return to take up his position as headmaster at the school and remained on the run for over a year.
Obviously, he had a lot to fear. After all, he was responsible for turning in many of the Death Eaters, so he wouldn't be welcomed with open arms by either Voldemort or his colleagues. With the start of the Second Wizarding War, and the deaths increasing more and more, the news that many knew would come one day finally arrived.
Igor Karkaroff was found dead in a cabin up north, with the dark mark hovering above it. Karkaroff may have managed to get a pardon from the law by turning in his former Death Eater colleagues to justice.
But, given the timing, his reckoning came and the price was his own life.
Thanks for watching until now, my wizards.
Unfortunately, not much is known about Karkaroff. He's a character I'm really curious to know more about.
I hope Harry Potter's story is explored in greater depth at some point in the series.
That would be really, really cool. But for now, that's what we know about the story of Igor Karkaroff.